Okay, Eamon, we're here in the GPO.
Yeah.
Here to launch a book, Ann Mathews' book on the Citizens' Army. Did you ever think you'd be in the GPO launching a book on the Citizen Army?
No, I didn't actually. It's wonderful to be able to launch a book sort of in the very place where the most dramatic and important chapter in the book actually took place. I mean, that's very unusual. And so you do get, it's not just a book about history which has been launched, there's the sense of history around the building. As we know, and I think that one of the most fascinating things about Ann's book, and about the Citizen Army generally, is the way in which sort of on Easter Monday 1916, in some ways I think that the future of Ireland was determined there, and I don't just mean, nationalism and the winning of independence for the 26 counties, etc., etc. I mean that the social content, if I can put it like that, the class character of the Ireland which was to emerge from 1916 and the War of Independence was really dictated sort of by the balance of influence, the balance of ideological power, if you like, between working class forces and the forces of nationalism, which sought to incorporate, of course, the working class and all classes within Ireland. And that's very unusual in terms of, if you look at European history and so forth, of having a distinctively working class element to the liberation movement, if you can put it like that. And it raises very profound questions about the nature of Irish nationalism, the nature of the state which emerged in 1922-23. And we look back now in the 1920s and we say, well, that blame people, and rightly so in some ways. There was the Censorship of Publications Act, the Censorship of Films Act, the ban on divorce, the licensing of dance halls, all those impressive things that which shaped the Free State as it then was. All that really flowed, I think, from the character, the nature sort of the movement which won independence. And one of the most striking things is the absence of a separate working class tendency by 1922-23. So it's very important when we're trying to understand Ireland, including the Ireland of today, that we look back at the period, sort of 1913, 14, 15, 16, sort of the period as the Citizen Army developed as an organic thing. It wasn't an army not created by leaders, sort of, or by the leadership of a political party deciding that they needed sort of an armed wing or any of that. And actually began, that happened later, but it began to develop sort of out of the practical necessities of the working class movement for self-defense, in order to assert the right and to create the ability to walk through, as working class people, to walk through a Dublin city. So that's tremendously important. And indeed, it's not fanciful to say that when we look around Ireland today, there are lockouts. We've had the Greyhound lockout recently. There's the fact that the mass of the people sort of are ground down in a way, and also you see sort of the use of nationalism today, where you say we're all in this together. It's really sort of wear the green jersey. Now, that's what was being said. I mean, of course, to people sort of back then, stop differentiating yourself from other elements within Ireland. Wear the green jersey. Well, I think the green jersey is worn out as far as our politics are concerned. I mean, it's grand for football. It's not grand for the politics of the 21st century. And one of the reasons for studying that period in the Irish Citizen Army, and one of the reasons why it's important that trade unionists, I believe, for example, read Ann's book, is precisely to rediscover that sort of hidden history, the hidden history of the working class and the hidden history of women, and everybody's a creature of their own times and so forth, but Connolly doesn't emerge entirely unscathed from Ann's book, sort of, in his attitude to women, sort of. So there's sometimes you can be as left-wing as you like, sort of, but you don't quite stand for everybody, and equality. Those lessons too, without making a meal sort of the question of Connolly's attitude to women, as I say, a man of his time. Those questions are still with us.
It's peculiar to hear you say that. I know you've read the book, I haven't, but Connolly is revered for his time and his attitude towards women, especially in America. He had many's a debate with DeLong, I think is his name, in America on the role of women, where the attitude there was, when socialism comes, women will be liberated, and Connolly's attitude was no, it must happen now, and we have the power to change that now. So it'll be very interesting to read that. I was just talking to Anne beforehand. She said the actual origin of the book was actually just before the starting of the Citizens' Army. Most people recognise the Citizens' Army as started by Connolly in 1913 as a reaction to the lockout, but it was actually predates that. Not by a lot.
And also one of the things that the book does is to restore Larkin to his proper role in the Citizen Army, because I grew up then that it was more or less Connolly's army. And of course it wasn't Connolly's army, and one man couldn't have created a force like that. But people are wiped sometimes from history. Sometimes it's because they don't suit. And of course Larkin became a controversial character, very controversial within the trade union movement, within the working class movement. An awkward customer, James Larkin, didn't quite fit into any of the ideological niches. And for that reason, I think his role, sort of his centrality to the emergence of the Citizen Army, has largely been forgotten, and so it's an act of, historical justice that he should be. And one of the things I got, which surprised me, as I read Anne's book, I actually have to confess, even though I'm very interested in politics and in history, I sort of wasn't aware, Larkin did anything. I really wasn't. I thought he was on the fringes as it was emerging.
But mostly history is remembered, not by the nitty-gritty things, because you take any section of history, you're always going to get, he done this, so he done that, and who's responsible. Really, the overall effect is the Citizen Army was classed as the First Red Army, an armed force of the working class to defend working class rights. And basically, I presume that's the way we should remember it, rather than where the origins really were.
The First Red Army in Europe, remember that, long, years before the Bolsheviks emerged in Russia, before the German Communist Party had any perspective of actually literally fighting for power in the state and so forth. The Citizen Army is unique, I think. It's unique to Ireland. It's very hard to think of, and when you look at the revolutionary history of continental Europe, it's very hard to see an exact equivalent or even a vague equivalent of the Citizen Army. And we're very fond in Ireland of cherishing the differences and our uniqueness. Well, there's it. We don't cherish that one, or at least the establishment doesn't, nearly to the extent that it ought to be cherished.
Well, as you said yourself, I mean, there was advances in Europe with the Bolsheviks and the German Communist Party, etc. After 1916, between the period 1916 to 22, some people class it as a counter-revolution took place, and as we know from the first government of Ireland, it was completely right-wing. Therefore, the likes of Connolly, Larkin, Citizens' Army was basically written out of history.
So they were being written out of history by the end of 1917. Remarkably, if you look at the Sinn Féin Ardèche in 1917, the first obviously after 1916. If you read the proceeding, read Dorothy McArdle's very standard nationalist history, the Irish Republic. There's no trace of it. There's no trace of the fact that there have been class tensions within the movement. It's 10% of the delegates were priests. So I wonder where did Catholic Ireland come from after 1923? There it is. And of course, you could argue, as I say, we have to keep remembering, you know, all the people involved in the Citizen Army were shaped by the times that they lived in. But whatever, I mean, Connolly's attitudes and Larkin's attitude to religion were starkly different. I mean, there was something pious, the piety of some of the leaders of 1916 in the army, and that's not to slag them off. That was sort of they were very different characters, you know. It's It's interesting. I mean, to play what might have been sort of a futile exercise. But you look at Plunkett, for example. I mean, who could have gone sort of with Connolly and so on. Wonderful, rich sort of and delightful character, Plunkett, with a great social conscience, even though he came from his family-owned slum flats in Dublin, but nevertheless, what an interesting man, open to ideas. And when you read his history of Plunkett and his admiration for Connie, his admiration for the strikers in 1913 and so forth, and the way he saw the 1913 strike as part of the national revolution, he could have gone either way, well, it's speculative, obviously, but it's just a pity that in the years, you say, between 1916 and 1922-23, that there wasn't a distinct political tendency built around the ideas of the Irish Citizen Army. That was a tragedy for Ireland.
Class seems to have disappeared at that
Class
stage.
had disappeared, yeah.
Ann's book goes right up to the 30s, as far as I know. Most people don't remember what happened to the Citizens Army after 16, 17, 18. So I'm really looking forward to reading exactly what happened. You've actually got a sneak preview of the book.
Indeed,
so
I did,
is there any revelations in that that we should be looking for?
Well, I think that revelation about for example, how prominent Rosie Hackett was, and even after the naming of the bridge after Rosie Hackett and so forth, and bits of newspaper articles and so forth, I hadn't quite got it until I read Ann's book. The extent to which the Citizen Army was a bottom-up organisation, of course, then it became military and the need for discipline and so on, that changed, but nevertheless, the Citizen Army, I don't think would have emerged had it not been for the semi-spontaneous reactions to oppression of rank-and-file trade unionists in Dublin. I mean, we, the working class, created this phenomenon. And it's well to remember that as well today, and sometimes ordinary workers are used as I would see it anyway, as a stage army to be brought out, and marched around the town or up to the top of the hill and then back down again. It's the potential of ordinary rank-and-file workers to shape and change history comes out in Ann's book and comes out of the Irish Citizen Army, and in a way that's the most important thing to remember.
Is there a possibility of a new Citizens Army? Can you... I know most people on the left would long for a Citizens Army, but in today's age and time, is it possible? Have things changed that much that it's not needed, or it wouldn't be tolerated, or...?
Well, I think if you look at the situation now, it's very, very unlikely. It's remote that such a thing would ever happen. But, 1912, it probably was remote. People would have said that couldn't happen. The Irish are quiet. They are followers and not leaders, and all the rest of it. They're tame. And that you read that in some of the polemics of the time, people say the people have let history down and so on. I don't know, was there any more outlandish then, say, in the years before 1913, than it would be now to imagine such a thing happening? Well, let's see. I mean, we can't say for sure.
Well, maybe today's Citizen Army will be made up by a bunch of lawyers getting together to challenge the state for workers' rights. Maybe.
That's right. We'll go to Europe. We'll take it to Europe, and they say.
Okay. Well, listen, I'm really looking forward to reading this book, and you recommend it?
I do very much recommend it, and as I say, I hope it's read by historians and all the rest of it, and academics, and it will be, but I hope that it's promoted within the trade union movement. I hope that it's promoted within the community sector, we can call it that, which is increasingly radicalised, particularly in Dublin City itself. So I hope it finds an audience there, and that people don't just read it, but that they discuss it and they ponder the lessons of it, because there are lessons there for today and for tomorrow.
Eamon McCann, thank you very much.
Not at all. Thanks very much.